All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Mallory.
And I'm Ryan, stepping in for Laura and McKenna.
I consummate into being a guest interviewer today. This is our final episode of our month of outdoor spaces. And honestly, I feel like we have a really good concluding episode. And I feel like our guest today is going to build on a lot of the things that we've talked about already. If you listen to my dad's episode that came out on Friday, he talked about the Ventura Land Trust. And appropriately, we have the development director of the Ventura Land Trust with us today, Chris Chaleunrath. Woo! I got it.
Nice
Okay.
job.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to have you here. He is, as I said, the development director for the Ventura Land Trust, but I'll let him give a little bit more of a background of himself.
Sure. It's well, first, thanks for letting me be here. Excited to always talk
Letting you
about.
be here. It's
Yeah,
a joy to have you here.
and just being able to chat and talk about anything with the outdoors and wellness. Those are important topics for sure, and things that I'm always interested in. So, yeah. So Chris Chaleunrath, I've the development director for Ventura Land Trust. And your dad has been an integral part of that organization, serving on the board for many years. So the organization's come a long way. I can go into the history of that a little bit later, but yeah, I've been working with them for about, I guess, about half a year now. I'm recently new to that organization, relatively new to Ventura, but I've had a pretty long history working 20 years in the nonprofit field with various organizations and causes. But I originally studied finance and worked for a very short stint in Wall Street in investment banking when I realized immediately that that wasn't going to be my path forward. And instead
Ryan
of just
can
making
relate to that.
right, so instead of trying to just basically make a ton of money and give it away, I decided just to go ahead and be on the front lines and help out those organizations from the inside out. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's the super short 30-second on me.
I mean, I feel like I would love to hear a little bit more of the evolution of how, I can speak from my experience as a young person. It feels
Hmm.
very overwhelming to think about kind of the career path that I'll have in my life. And you've had such a varied career path. So maybe you could
Yeah.
speak a little bit on just the evolution of how all of that happened. Obviously, you don't have to go, you can go as in depth as you would like, but I think it's helpful as a young person to kind of hear the thought
Yeah.
process behind how you made the career decisions that you did.
Yeah. I mean, I have some, to be honest, I have some issues with the fact that, young adults, teenagers start to have to think about their profession and their career and
Yeah.
their expertise and what they're going to study and specialize in at an early age, even prior to ever even entering college, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you have to even think about that in terms of like what kind of college you're going to, because what are they good at, or what do they really focus on, or what is really going to help your career because you're in the right school that provides the right education for whatever that field is. So there's just a lot of challenges, I think, for young adults in that realm, because I feel like it takes time to really get yourself embedded in the industry a bit. I'm a perfect example of how I really thought I I think I thought when I was at the early age of maybe 12 or 13 that I knew I was really, good with like math and numbers, and it kind of came to me pretty easily, and I sort of somehow figured out that maybe that meant I should do it for a career. Or if people often told me, "Oh, you're really good at that stuff, and you're good with some, with computers, and so you should just do something with that." And instead of thinking like, "What do I really enjoy, or what do I really care about? What is really going to be fulfilling to me and my career as a whole?" Follow a path because you're good at it, and that's something that I think was actually bad advice for me. So inevitably, it's sort of a cycle of positive reinforcement that you get good grades, teachers praise you, you did great in that study, and then you inevitably are ranked high. You go into certain programs that are really exclusive. You go into a Merrill Lynch training program, essentially. You go into that process. You learn how to compete with all of your other training, your cohort to be the best at what you do. And then you get selected to be in, the more exclusive offices, the ones on Wall Street versus the ones in the middle of nowhere towns. So no offense to middle of nowhere towns. But all of that time, I mean, we're talking probably 10 years of my life, from 12 to say 22, was on that journey with that intention. And when I physically started working in investment banking and crunching numbers and being a data analyst and working 80-hour weeks, every other Sunday off kind of a thing, I immediately realized this is not what I want to do. So just imagine the challenge it takes for you in your psyche to go from, oh my God, 10 years of my life, all of my study, everything I've been doing is leading up to this point. I'm finally here and I absolutely hate it. And the challenge is, there's some stopgaps for that, right? There's some very well constructed internship programs. There are some work study things. There's some things that maybe I didn't take as much advantage of growing up, but that's been a big thing. That's okay. That's a big thing that I, as I mentor, folks in high school and in college, I expressed like a big advocate for trying to get out there in the field as best you can, and really getting yourself into understanding what the industry is about. Same goes for nonprofit too. Some people come into nonprofit, and I've seen it time and time again, where they go in there bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, very idealistic, which I think is amazing and an important way to approach the work. But then they understand the realities of working for a nonprofit, and it's a very challenging industry to work in. You don't have the same level of financial security and benefits and retirement and things like that you would imagine with most other for-profit industries. So you really have to bust your butt. And some nonprofit workers have no benefits, and some of them work, they're contractors, or they work part-time, or they work full-time, but they have to work an extra job to make ends meet, so they're trying to work for a food bank or a shelter or something, because they really care about the work, but they also need to, put food on the table and take care of their family. So I can go on and on about it, but yeah, my whole point is really just it's a difficult journey for everyone, and I really think that exposure is the number one thing, really, to get embedded in any way you can. And it's a challenge for some folks with certain demographics. You don't have the same levels of opportunity. You might not be able to take an unpaid internship because you need to make some money. Maybe you don't have family members or friends or contacts or networks to open doors for you. So there's just a whole nother like social economic barrier involved with that too. So I'm not sure if that even answered your question, but that's just one of the learnings I've had, and I've been very fortunate to really work hard and figure out my journey, and to really figure out what I want to do with this industry and this career. And I do work full time with VLT, but I also consult on the side, mainly just because I have a lot of interest in supporting other organizations. Other reason is it supports me with a little additional financial income, and I also serve on a couple of boards and things like that too. So it's sort of a long journey for me to get here, but I've been really fortunate with the opportunities I had, and was able to take advantage and seize those opportunities when I could.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I relate to a lot of it. And I think it's especially helpful for young people to hear all of that, because I think you see it a lot these days where students, when they're in college, are driven towards the usual paths of investment banking and consulting,
Right.
often because of financial security, which is totally fine. I mean, I would never knock anybody for wanting to go into those fields just to make money. That is reason enough. But also in our generation, which I think is different from those of our parents and older, is that young people these days want to find a balance in their career where they are doing some sort of good for the world, but also making enough money. And it's this like tug of war that sometimes the money side alone wins out. And that's when I think you get students going into investment banking and financial services or consulting, And they do
Right.
reach the point that you were at where they're like, whoa, this is not fulfilling in any way. I was there.
Right.
So yeah, I know that's really good advice. Just to immerse yourself in different fields, because I think the reality is there are ways out there to build careers varied like yours that maybe cross sectors, and you're doing a lot of different things, but they're harder to find. They're not as in your
For
face
sure.
as investment banking and consulting. So
Right. And Ryan, what was your, like, were you also following an investment banking trajectory
it
as
wasn't
well?
investment banking. I was in the portfolio management space, but
Mm-hmm.
equally, I mean, I was managing money for very wealthy people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not very exciting to me. I didn't really find that I genuinely cared about the clients that I was serving. I know that sounds
Mm-hmm.
bad, but it's just I it
It's the reality.
I didn't feel like I had a stake in the work that I was doing. A lot of my
Mm-hmm.
coworkers they're very good at their jobs, and they did find that stake, and a lot of people do, and good for them. But
Mm-hmm.
after 3 years of it, after undergrad, you get to a point where you get to that promotion where like it goes from like an analyst position to like, no, this is now my professional identity. Like I reached
Right.
that kind of ceiling, and I decided, no, I'm going to exit stage left. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the scary thing for, I think, a lot of, young adults and especially young professionals is, Ryan, you had that epiphany essentially 3 years in, and some other ones, they uh, either, get lured by either, the benefits and the paycheck and maybe the prestige or what have you, and then they're in the career, let's say for 10 years or 15 years.
mm,
Then it becomes a bigger part of their identity, and then they're worried about, like, how do they pivot away or how do they shift away. And it's much different to pivot away when you're 25 versus when you're 35 or 40, and you're now like becoming middle management or senior management, and now you're really like, how do I go from, I'm just going to put a ballpark number. Let's say, how do you go from making $250,000 in just salary, no bonuses at 45 to doing something you love? Let's say you want to be a teacher and now you make 45,000, right? So it's a really, really challenging, scary, decision process that everyone has to figure out. And there is no really great roadmap for it. If there was one, people would just simply follow that. But everyone has their own journey. Everybody has their own set of circumstances and challenges and limitations. And yeah, so I feel for you. I'm
yeah.
glad that you came to that epiphany. And the good thing is now you're, now sort of discovering your own path and figuring out what is really going to be fulfilling. And in many ways, that's um, you know, a journey that is not necessarily for everyone. Some people prefer to just have stability and have a great paycheck and have a lot of financial freedom that way. And honestly, more power to them. Like you said, I think that that's also really, um, you know, something that I think should be admired as well for people who just can focus on that and be a part of that industry for their, for their security, for their families and what have you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to your point, Chris, about how from like age 12 to 22, you had this like what you felt like was a clear path of what you wanted to do.
Mm.
And then you got there. I know I was like with Ryan when he was having kind of this existential crisis about his identity. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is really hard for people, even, even being young, being 23, 24, and being like, I was so sure that this is what I wanted to do. And then the glass shatters and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, well, now, like, who am I? Because I
Right.
spent so much time thinking this is who I was. And I think that's, Ryan ended up going to therapy about it because it's like he really like
Yeah.
had to process like, who
Yeah.
am I without this career path? Because this has been my identity, even if it's like, even in just a college sense, like it doesn't even have to be the professional sense yet. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that affirmation from other people in your life, particularly adults, whether they're they can be your parents, but also just other older mentors. that you're on a good path. This is a really good career. It's very, very powerful.
Correct.
And it's not that they were
Validating.
It's not that they're wrong. I mean, they're all, you know, in most cases, very successful people that have genuine advice, and they want to help you and see you succeed. But that reinforces, definitely did for me. And it gave me this kind of myopic view on my career, where I didn't look at other paths. There's, you know, there's many paths you can take to get to the same result, and I was only looking at one.
Right. And I'm going to make an assumption that you might be a little more like me, where you can get laser focused on something, and when you like target fixate into a goal or into a, you know, an objective, you're there and you're going to get there. And then, you know, sometimes the blinders are on until you reach that finish line. And so, yeah, it can be challenging for certain personalities for sure. And I think that, you know, one of the other things you can add on as an additional layer of why this sucks is people spend a ton of money, especially this day and age, on education, on their college degree. And they, you know, they go into great financial debt for that. And they study something that they end up never using. And they then graduate with this financial debt and a ton of resentment for, why did I study this? Like, why did I go to this school? Like, what was my decision making? Maybe somebody gave me some bad advice. You know, I don't know how they'll process that, but that can be really difficult, because then they're working through that that financial debt. It's just a constant reminder, right, of that mistake, in their eyes, a mistake that they made by going to that school or studying that course of action.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a good tie into your evolution of a personal philosophy, because I get the sense that, you know, that may have, I mean, it may have started way before, but I feel like being in that moment of, this isn't what I want to do, you do. And I watched Ryan do it, kind of have to reevaluate what is meaningful, like what is finding meaning in a career, what does purpose look like. And so I'm curious to hear, like, what started the process of even creating a personal philosophy for you, and what has that evolution looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want you to provide more credence to this than it really is. It's just basically my haphazard way of trying to process, like, you know, my journey and what I determine as my course of trying to find fulfillment and happiness and balance. And it's been something that I've been working through for a long time. I'm still working through it, but essentially, you know, I was constantly dealing with two major factors in my life, where my father started his own nonprofit. He was constantly connected to the community. He had a huge network of friends, and he was, I would say, extremely overworked, extremely stressed, but at the same time, I think very happy and fulfilled with his life. But he was also didn't make very much money, and couldn't really be you know, that generous to his family and to his children, both with his time and with his finances. And that level of you know, growing up in that provided a window that of what I wanted and didn't want as a child, trying to formulating what that would be. So that's essentially a little bit of what developed me into being like, no, I'm just going to make a ton of money. I'm just going to provide for my family. I'm just going to not ever worry about this. And that's going to be how I'll approach my life, and then I'll find happiness that way. Inevitably, as you can imagine, that wasn't what I realized was going to be fulfilling. And then I've gone on this journey essentially to figure out, okay, well, what is happiness? What is fulfillment? And how do you balance that within our society and our pragmatic life of trying to like pay bills and live in this economy? Like, you can't just live in this, you know, idealistic world of only being there to you know, do things that feel great for you and help the world, because that's not, unfortunately, and based in reality, for us to survive. So you know, I really have thought long and hard about what does that really mean, and sort of when I'm mentoring, especially as I'm mentoring younger adults, like the ones that I've seen that have really started to develop a strong path forward and make some really great progress, versus the ones that have been wavering a bit, have had some challenges. And I really think that has to do with a balance of two major things, which is a combination really of having a certain level of tenacity and grit, and and being having a level of just really strong like mental fortitude to really focus and be able to deal with certain challenges and hard times. But at the same time, you know, that can like an added layer of that complexity is that if you just focus on that, you might lose a little bit of an awareness to an injustice that's happening. The fact that maybe you're not being empowered to really speak your mind or take care of yourself or really be representative of what you really care about and what you really want to focus on or be you know a part of your character. So you know you really just can't focus purely on being like working really hard and just focusing on that. And there's a lot of other external factors you have to think of you know what are the circumstances that you have, and there's some challenges where like not everybody is created equal in terms of the opportunities they have. So you know you can't just simply say just work hard, because that doesn't work. But there needs to be a balance over like you can't also think that having you know not having any grit is going to provide a level of success too. And people you know are really struggling with that fact of really understanding the value of that. So there's something to be said about that. But then at the same time, you know, that's the mechanics of it. And then the whole other thing that I've really kind of been trying to figure out is this, you know, understanding what it means to be fulfilled and balanced, and then also what does that mean for happiness. And I kind of keep those a bit separate, because I feel like there's a dependency on the two. Whereas if you are not taking care of your personal wellness, bringing it back to the point of our conversation, and not bringing it back to your own health and your own emotional, mental, physical wellness, and being very hyper vigilant on like focusing on those things, then you really have not set up a good foundation for you to really then seek what it is that makes you happy and what it is that brings you joy and fulfillment. If you are, you know, always struggling with, you know, being depressed or being, you know, unhealthy or sick or what have you, then it's hard for you to really think about what brings you joy, right? Whereas if you are constantly focusing on what brings you joy, and maybe let's say it's a community group, or it's your partner or your spouse or whatever, but then at the same time you are not taking care of your own personal wellness, then it won't be sustainable. So there's this thing that I'm always trying to explain to folks that care about my thoughts on this, is that you have to think about it, you know, in conjunction to each other, and you have to really focus on that. So it's this, you know, going into a bit of an amalgamation that I call it of I don't know what you would even label it as, but like a Stoicism 3.0 meets Taoism meets Buddhism for like the philosophy around it and like how you approach life. But then in terms of like what brings you happiness and what brings you fulfillment is really, you know, something that you have to have an internal journey about. And, you know, I have a theory that I read a bunch of studies on it, and some of the things that I really have learned myself through my own lifetime has been around, you know, it's not about money that I've learned now. It's not about material possessions. It's not really even about, you know, title and class and prestige with your work. It's really about at the end of the day, do you feel like you are spending your time well? And then and the one really important part for me is like, how are your relationships? And I feel like the relationships I have with my wife, with my good friends, with my family are the most important part of me really feeling joy and fulfillment. And it kind of harks back to, I think, maybe that that one Harvard study that was conducted like over 80 years, that was published by that psychiatrist George Valiant, who took over the program after like two other directors that were running the program for decades. And they studied essentially, you know, Harvard graduates over the course of 80 years, and just following and doing interviews and seeing what it is at the end of the day that brought them fulfillment and happiness versus, all the other factors, and it being from like their education to their money to their, you know, class in their society versus, what all the other factors that go into it, right? And essentially, the one thing that they discovered, and I'm pretty much very much in line with, is they concluded that relationships was the main factor for happiness. And so that's really, I think, what I've honed into now in terms of, my career now of 20 years and what I'm really trying to achieve, and what I'm trying to spend my life is like, I just want to spend it with the right people. I want to do a job where I feel like I'm connecting with the right type of work, and I'm surrounded by the type of people that I want to help and support and care about, and just somehow balance it with hard work and being very pragmatic about living in Ventura, California, which is not necessarily the cheapest place to live, and also being able to take care of my wife and my family and things like that. So yeah, that's a very convoluted way of providing a little insight of my brain here and how I see that. But it's still developing, but that's just one aspect, one perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more on the relationships component. I feel like Mal and I are lucky to have just the most incredible group of friends in this area. We do all sorts of activities together, like climb, pickleball, like go out to dinner, you name it. But sometimes we reflect on, after we have a good day, we'll just be like, man, we are so lucky to have this group of friends. It's like, it's never anything material in those reflections. It's never something we own, or, you know what I mean? It's just like, wow, this friend group is amazing and we're lucky to have them. And so, yeah, it's just family and friends are definitely a driver of happiness.
Yeah. And what really hit it home to me is one of the many stints I had in my nonprofit careers. I worked for an international development organization, Heifer International, that goes over to developing countries and sort of goes in there on the ground and helps support communities to attain like a sustainable income through agriculture, generally through agriculture. And they would form these groups based on just the community, like the small town, and provide trainings and access to opportunities and investments and things like that, whatever they needed, and to essentially get whatever this community is trying to produce or trying to do to provide a living for each other in a more effective way, and not be wrapped up in a lot of things around like corruption, inefficiency, things like that. Long story short, when I would go visit these communities, there were some of the happiest people I've ever met, and they are also some of the most impoverished people I've ever met. And so that's not an indication for me. That didn't hit me over the head of like, it doesn't matter to me how much money you make, because these are extremely happy people. And the main reason why is they have this community together, this group of people going into this work together, taking care of each other. They care for each other's children. They hang out together. They play, all the little kids play soccer with basically a wadded up thing of cardboard and tape, it doesn't matter about the material possessions. It just, they were so happy because they had each other, and they could spend time, like quality time with each other, and really just have the joy of being, loved and being connected and being able to share in that journey with each other. So yeah, I completely agree with you. It's an important thing to think about what that group is for you, and everybody, as long as, no matter how extroverted or introverted you are, we're social creatures, and it's an important aspect of our overall happiness. But again, this is just my philosophy. I know there's also people that are extremely happy being isolated and being on their own, and they take peace in understanding that they're out in the middle of nowhere. And there's part of me that respects that. Like, I enjoy being out in the wilderness for certain amounts of time too. But yeah, so by no means is this like a universal philosophy.
It kind of reminds me of like the blue zones that have been. I remember Sardinia in Italy is one of them. These zones that were studied by researchers on why these people are the ones on planet Earth that live the longest. They
Mm-hmm.
routinely live past 100, and it
Mm-hmm.
was just something like, they have a neighborhood of friends and they eat food together. So,
Yeah.
it's
It's,
like
they
really, it's
drink a
really
lot of
that simple.
alcohol. They smoke cigarettes. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, um, and it crosses so many cultures and so many, so many boundaries and economic levels for sure. So yeah, I there's something to be said about that, and I do hope that there's a lot more studies on that. I think it's something that should really be explored more.
All right, I think I want to pivot to the outdoors, but I feel like it is relevant. I mean, the Blue Zones did talk about like time outdoors and how the cultures that live the longest also really value their like
Yes.
the bioregionalism. They really get to
Mm-hmm.
know their local environment and make time to enjoy that. So I think that is relevant to a huge reason that I think outdoor spaces and public lands are important is the connection piece. I was just on the last podcast, I was talking about how growing up in Ventura,
Mm-hmm.
Arroyo Verde was a place where everyone just goes on the weekends. Like there's like 100 people just having like birthday parties. And,
Yeah.
my mom and my stepdad had their rehearsal dinner there. And it's just, I feel like parks and public lands are huge centers of connection and community. I think Harmon Canyon is a great example of that we talked about on the last podcast. Like you
Mm-hmm.
rarely see people walking alone at Harmon Canyon. Like they're always in pairs or with, having fun. So I guess, why do you think that having access to outdoor spaces is important, and how has maybe having those spaces in your life brought you joy or impacted you?
Yeah, I think that there's so many studies and there's a lot of correlation between the health benefits of being outdoors, from anything from like the exposure to having vitamin D in your system so you don't become depressed, versus having the ability to be exposed just to uh, not recirculated air constantly and all of that. So anyway, without going into too much detail on that, but um, the public space conversation um, for communities is such a critical uh, aspect of really what it provides for true happiness of a community. So if there was no Arroyo Verde, for example, in Ventura, it would really be impactful for a lot of people. And in my opinion, I feel that Ventura actually was in a bit of a open space deficit for a long time. I mean, if you really wanted to go hiking, if you really wanted to spend space outdoors and in public in a natural space, not necessarily a park, for example, you had to either venture to Ojai, to Santa Barbara, or to Malibu. And for those that are not local, for the listeners that are not local, I mean, that's easily 30 minutes in each direction. And to an area like California in this region, that's absurd. So kind of one of the main reasons why I wanted to work for Ventura Land Trust is to sort of help rectify that issue. And just to talk about Harmon, since you mentioned it, I mean, when Harmon opened, it opened earlier than we had planned because we, just through understanding with our partners and our funders, that with COVID, there was a huge demand for people to go recreate outdoors. And we just thought it was at a point where it could be open. There's not a lot of trails. It's not quite developed yet, but it's at a point where we can at least, silently have it available to the public. And it went from what we anticipated it being used would be around, in the first year, give or take, about 10,000 people. And we dramatically underestimated how much of a demand it was for people to use outdoors. And only essentially it's present day, we're estimating that Harmon is being used by about 175,000 people per year. So that's just a local small community with one nature preserve. It's 2,200 acres, and we only have, at this point, about between 8 and 10 miles, depending on how you think about it, of trails. So it's such a huge need for a community. And it just, if you just imagine the benefit of having a place like Harmon or Arroyo, which is a small fraction of the size of Harmon, it means a lot for the community, right? And it's one of those things where there are a lot of communities out there, especially communities that are maybe of a different economic level and maybe a more urban developed level. They just don't have the same access to public space. There might be a small park, there might be something with a playground or a little field or something like that, or a basketball court. But it's one of those things that's super, super critical, I think, for the overall happiness of the community. And I think that that's something that there's a lot of great organizations out there that are really trying to emphasize the importance of that, understanding preserving public spaces and preserving public lands for anyone and everyone to access. I think that with urban development and just kind of development of our history as a of our country, we've learned that mistake, right? If you think about all the states in the east of the Mississippi and how many public parks there are and how many green spaces there are as comparatively to states west of the Mississippi. Granted, the way that we developed as a nation, but without things that were in place, like the development of national parks with like Yellowstone in like 1872, to Theodore Roosevelt understanding the importance of these national spaces and developing, preserving like 150 national forests, right? In 1951, and there's just like goes on and on of like how this became a pretty natural and really clear value to our country and to all of our residents, that we have these green spaces. So it's something that I really hope that we understand the value of it, understand how it impacts our community and our physical and mental health, by having accessibility to that. And it's one of the things I'm sad to see areas of really urban areas, or places more, back to my hometown near DC and sort of the Eastern Mid-Atlantic area and things like that, just don't have the same level of access as California, or states in the West. And it's a tragedy because, it's much more difficult. I grew up in DC, and if I wanted to go hiking, like truly hiking, I had to drive out for 2.5 hours to Shenandoah, So, and you two are, have spent time in DC. Are you in DC now, or are you back in?
We live in Arlington.
Okay.
But yeah, we're in Arlington right now.
So you know what I'm talking about. Like if you really wanted to go hiking, what are your options? Great Falls?
We don't have a car,
you can do Rock Creek. Rock Creek
Right.
has a pretty good trail system. Fountainhead Regional Park is a half hour away.
Right.
We love this area. We love the group that we have here, but we talk all the time about how the number one reason, and it is a large enough reason to make us leave, is the lack of outdoor space.
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine if you didn't have Rock Creek Park, right?
Which isn't even close to us in Arlington.
Right.
Even Rock Creek is like tough to get to, whether you take the metro or drive. If there's traffic, it's 30, 40 minutes. It's wild. Yeah.
Right. And I live, I spent 5 years in New York City, and if it wasn't for Central Park, I would probably go insane. Yeah. And Central Park is the most manufactured park in the history of parks, right? But it is used by so many New Yorkers because they need it. They physically and mentally need that space, even if it's this fake facade of nature. We would just eat it up because we had to have time away from the concrete jungle. And even in Ventura, even if I'm not even in a densely urban area and I need to have time out in a nature preserve, or a national park or a national forest or things like that, just even to have a little bit of balance in life. And it's one of those things that, and VLT has been really pushing and enforcing this like emphasis on providing education for younger families and for students, as early as preschool, to get them out there and just get them used to understanding the value and having that this is a resource for them. And my biggest, my biggest soapbox moment is always about how we need to figure out a way to provide that for communities that normally don't have access to places like this. They can't get there because there's not a great bus stop that takes them there, or it's not even in their neighborhood, and they have to really commute to get there. Like you were mentioning, to get to Rock Creek Park, so 30 minutes away, right? So things like that is always these barriers that I just really feel like we need to address and eliminate.
You want to ask your question?
Which one?
The last one.
What was the last? Yeah. So I guess I want to know, in a perfect world where Chris can, wave a magic wand, how are public lands best protected? I mean, land trusts like VLT. I mean, I love the concept of those organizations, but in an ideal world, is there more to it that you would be doing, besides just putting a land trust, operational in any locality you can? Like, what else is there?
Yeah, I mean, the fortunate thing is people are really realizing the value of a land trust. That every local land trust is becoming a critical factor in the community, and VLT is only around for 20 years. It's a relatively young land trust, and for the first 10 years, it was essentially almost volunteer driven, with like only a couple of staff. And so just thinking about the importance of all the years of just kind of scraping by with like people giving small donations, just at least get them to the point where VLT could then at least be in the right place at the right time to take on a few more properties, and then eventually have the fortunate opportunity to take over an amazing property like Harmon, and now provide this manage and steward this natural space for 175 visitors a year at Harmon. And then now we're going to be opening Mariano Rancho, which is another 1,600 acres, which is overlooking the beautiful like coastline of Ventura and the downtown. It's just going to be this amazing property for the public to use. And we can't even fathom what the level of use that will be. So yes, I mean, I'm biased. I'll say, of course, land trust, number one. That's a critical factor. If I could wave my wand, I would want more land trusts to be basically more involved in every community. Funding for, and this isn't just land trust. I have a big like environmental scope on this too, but like just funding for the environment in general, from climate to protecting our natural parks and natural preserves, is ballpark about 3% of all philanthropic dollars that are given every year. Okay, so it's one of the least funded aspects of charitable giving, and it's a tragedy. And so, there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things, if I could wave the wand, I would say we need to really think about what is important to the way that we do philanthropic dollars, the way that we do government spending, the way that corporations are involved, and that is also tied to it, where I think corporations and companies that are based in certain communities, there's a lot of this facade of like they're helping and they're giving back, they're doing a little bit of trash cleanup here and there, which is great, and I appreciate that. But this is a whole other conversation around like our economy, but it's like there needs to be, I think, a level of awareness for, what is the impact for these companies? Are they being ethically and responsible to not only what they're doing and what they're producing, which we're, trying to do a better job of providing that transparency and accountability, but also like their impact on the community. It's like essentially, I think it should go hand in hand. If you're going to do business in a community, then you need to provide and support the community at a certain level. Similarly, and I'm not just saying that around like, companies only, but I just think like that's a requirement for anyone, right? So it's embedded in the way that we do taxes. So like that our tax dollars goes to supporting various levels of things. But I always think that we could do more. I think that people should be more involved with their nonprofits. People should find causes they really care about. I think it should be a more natural state of being where like everybody is involved with charity in some way, shape, or form, whatever drives you, whatever you're passionate about. And there should be just less focus purely on, your paycheck and your your own profession and your career. But obviously, it's not a perfect world, and people sometimes have to work two jobs because they need to make ends meet, and they can't volunteer time. But there's also research that says people within the lower third of the economic bracket give more money away than the upper third. as a percentage. So there's something to be said about, really, does that hold water if you think about, like, an economic status being the barrier? So yeah, I could keep going with the wand, but yeah, to me, the 30 by 30 for California, about 30% of all lands being um, uh, public lands held as public space by 2030 is a critical piece of policy. I just hope that's something that we can think about for other places. If you think like you're in Virginia, right? So I think Virginia, like the amount of public spaces in Virginia is like 17%. If you look at California currently, overall, it's like 50%. And so just imagine how many spaces that are then out of those public spaces are allowed for recreation, or allowed for use as a Virginian. It's tragic. So yeah, just changing the dynamic a little bit. And a lot of people sort of see public spaces or green spaces like, anti-business or anti-industry or like housing development. And I don't agree with that. I think that there's certain spaces that can be used for public recreation, and there's certain spaces that we should be used for industry or for housing. Like, for example, Mariano is not great for housing. It's highly erosive. It's super dangerous to try to build a home there. It's very expensive to try to build a foundation there. It just it's not very cost effective for a housing development. However, you can build some light trails there for people to hike and bike on. So yeah, I just think that we need to change the dynamic a little bit of it not being so adversarial around public spaces. I know that's always a challenge that we all have.
I feel like you really got me thinking about the concept. Well, I was just thinking about Arlington, and Arlington is great at having like little parks. There's little parks everywhere in Arlington, and
Sure.
like they're really nice. If I want to go on a walk, I can go walk to a little park. But as someone who like loves to hike, loves to backpack, Ryan as a trail runner, like those little parks don't cut it for people who want more outdoor space. And so I've just been sort of reflecting on like almost the tiers of outdoor space that maybe a neighborhood has. Like, sure, we have great little parks, and in Arlington, it's an urban area. Like, there aren't, as of now, there aren't really, large swaths of area that could suddenly turn into a public land, but maybe there are, and I just don't know about it. But
Right.
It's kind of an interesting thought, is like, we have been feeling like frustrated that there's not more space for us to go hiking, etc. But it's not that there aren't public or like parks for us to go to. So it's kind of like I'm thinking about both sides of the coin. Is you can have those like little parks, but they don't always meet the need of like us who like the larger public spaces. Does that make sense?
It's interesting.
Totally.
Like, I feel like if you were to go to the Arlington Parks Department and told them that they didn't have enough public space, they actually might respond and be like, they'd give you like, whoa, like, I mean, we have all these parks. Well, what are you talking about? So that's honestly part of the battle in getting the public space in the way that Ventura Land Trust maintains. It's like a lot of parks departments all over the country probably think that we have parks all over the place. We're opening up a new one. Like, we're all good. And that's maybe not what we mean.
And to be clear, like, I love these parks. Like, I love them. They're great for families. They're very fun to walk through, but they're different. Like, they're different than a Harmon Canyon, or, that's not what they are.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction that you're making there between like a park and like a nature preserve, and then a nature. And what you're mentioning with tiers is exactly what is indicative of what we're trying to achieve overall in terms of like public land, right? So think of like a small neighborhood park, and then you go to like a regional park, and those are like normally county run or government funded, and there's a whole structure and bureaucracy around that. And you go to like nature preserves or trusted nature trust land. And public trust land. So those are run by a nonprofit, right? So they're privately run. So they're not a park. And there's one of those things that we are constantly educating folks, because they think it's a public park that they have the right to access anytime they want. And so when we have to close down the park for maintenance, or if we're running a fundraiser because we got to pay for things, they get really upset, because they're like, well, I didn't know this. I was going to go hiking. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this isn't a county park, But that being said, there's so many tiers, right? You go into like national forest land, you go into BLM, you go into national parks. I mean, there's so many tiers. And when you get to like, think about the value of a national park now. Okay. Imagine if we got rid of Yosemite. Imagine if we like just got rid of and just developed over Yellowstone or something. I mean, it would be a complete disaster. It would, people would go up in arms about it.
Yeah.
So we see the value of these national preserves, national parks, national forest land now, but it was difficult back when Virginia was being developed, right? No one was thinking about it. And so the benefit of Western states is that they had some awareness and some policy, but now, like, especially with areas like Virginia, it's hard to backtrack because you can't kick people out of their homes. You can't, you can't start designating and zoning places that were essentially a bunch of businesses and saying you have to leave because we're going to build a park there. So my where I'm advocating is that we have to preserve what we have. So every public land, every forest, everything, like we just need to stop developing them now, especially on states on the eastern side of the country. We have to protect those things. And even if it's not being used, even if there's still issues around, maybe it used to be, a runoff for a petrochem plant or something, some things that are happening, especially in the Chesapeake Bay area, we still need to preserve it. And trusts do that. Like that's one of the things that we do is we take over parcels of land. We can't open it to the public because of various reasons, from environmental reasons to safety reasons, so what have you, but we still protect it in perpetuity just so nobody can develop it at the moment. And then we sort of figure out how do we is it just become a natural habitat for native wildlife and plants? Do we then open it up for the public somehow? So it's just one of those things that are constantly in flux with like land developers and industry and anything from mining to logging and things like that. And that's not saying that those are important industries, but there just needs to be a better, more holistic thinking about how we use those spaces.
Yeah. Do you want to ask the next question? The one that we just pointed on the thing.
So I guess to close out, what advice would you give to, the listeners, predominantly young folks? Like how do they get involved in their local public lands, especially if they're like us and maybe they live in an area that doesn't have a lot? What is there so that we can get in and do something?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's really about finding whatever that one, get out there. Like it's for people who maybe don't realize like what public spaces they have. Do find your local land trust, or do a lot of research and just sort of figure it out and get out there and just understand what things that you care about. That normally will begin to open your eyes towards how you can be involved and how you can help. And for younger adults, I really think that the benefit is I see that there's a lot more impassioned young adults towards the environment and towards this space than I would say any other generation. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've really been really pleased to see sort of the momentum shifting towards that. But the challenge is you don't have to give money, but if you do, give whatever you feel comfortable with, and really get involved and really get engaged with a couple of organizations, or even just one organization that you feel is doing great work, and support them with your time, support them with your not only your time but also your ability to maybe just bring others in, bring your friends. Like if look at what opportunities you have for volunteering, but at the same time do a little fundraiser for them. Just be inventive, be creative, do something like a GoFundMe page and create something fun and cool, and then donate it all to the organization. Especially those small organizations where they're going hand to mouth. Every dollar helps. So I would say it's not necessarily about you giving your own money, but just like really just be engaged, be an advocate, get out there, and more importantly, just try to help educate others. Just because some folks just either by their upbringing or where they're just their lack of connection and to other folks that are already in that space, they just might not know what's out there. So be a good advocate for your public green spaces for sure.
this reminds me my birthday's in a couple weeks, so I'm gonna definitely try to get people to donate to the Ventura Land Trust.
Yay, there you go.
Yeah. Chris, this has been such a pleasure, and I feel like I have a lot of things to think about and to process after this, and I think it was a really important episode for our listeners too, and a great conclusion to this month. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm happy that I was able to provide any insight on this at all. And I think that
insight.
I think that you know, especially with your listeners, this is an important dichotomy that we're shifting. So I really am impressed to see the passion that the younger generation is having toward the environment. I wish that this passion was evident maybe 30 years ago. We wouldn't be in the issues that we are now. So keep doing what you're doing as well. Get the word out. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks for listening. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care.